as a quick introduction, I'm Frances. I lead the marketing team here at Instawork. For those who may not know what Instawork is, we're a flexible staffing solution for the warehouse and logistics space. We're in 15 markets. You can kind of see over here on the side. And with the hundreds of thousands of professionals that we have, we've really helped lots of businesses have high fill rates with high reliability, especially in this last year where there was, a lot of disruption in the industry. And our goal is to really create a great experience and great solution for both of our businesses and our professionals. And we know that for that to happen, a good portion of that relies on the businesses that we work with. And so invited Tom to speak with everybody and share some of his learnings and how he has created a really great warehouse culture at Literati, because we've heard from our professionals like really great feedback, and we thought that it'd be something that'd be really interesting to hear. So with that, I thought I'll kick it off to Thomas. I think really though, just to sort of reiterate, this is really a session for everybody here. And so I can kick it off with a few questions, but please chime in either via chat or just, go off mute because it really is about, brainstorming how do we solve this together. So maybe we can actually kick it off with Thomas, and if you guys want, we can actually go around and have everybody introduce themselves and kind of where they're at. So Tom also knows who he's speaking to today.
Cool. So like Frances said, my name is Tom Wales. I'm currently at a startup called Literati here in Austin. Before this, I was with another startup called Spreetail. And in the 4 years that I was there, we went from about $50 million a year in revenue to $750 million a year in revenue. And so the hyper growth there was in the 60 to 120% range. At Literati currently, we're rocking a 300% growth rate, which is pretty gnarly. And I was the crisis manager for Spreetail before I came here. So there's probably not a whole lot of problems in medium to large size buildings that I haven't seen.
Why don't you share a little bit in terms of how you got started at Literati, kind of the environment, and what are some of the things that you saw?
So Literati was probably like any other, seed or Series A startup, which means that they had some fairly talented individual contributors, but not a lot of bench strength or depth of knowledge on the operations team. So there were some people who had their hearts in the right place, but just didn't know the thing that they were about to do. And so we had hired a CMO type human to come in, and he's apparently a wizard. I don't know if he wears a pointy hat in his off time or not, but he waved his magic wand, and all of a sudden the growth started pouring in. So when I first got to Literati, it was just a lot of what we would call that small scale operation that didn't scale to growth. So we didn't have packing stations. We had what they lovingly called assembly lines, which were not assembly lines and were frankly a little terrifying, at least from an efficiency and efficacy point of view. We were spending a ton of hours there. When we got here, it was really quick to identify, I was really quick to identify the humans that were going to survive. And I mean that from a compatibility with me / compatibility with the changing environment. And so, Sarah, you mentioned hey, you're kind of small right now and you're growing up. So this is a thing I would definitely call out to you. There's going to be some humans that aren't going to want to change. That's just part of the thing. When you go through growth and you try and build that kind of culture where you're scaling up and you're taking more stuff in-house, some people like the way things were before and they're change adverse. So that's a constant kind of struggle there, is how you download that into your team to get them to see the vision, to see where they're going. And even if you executed that perfectly, I mean, flawlessly, there's going to be a couple of humans that aren't interested in doing that. So that's kind of what Literati had to deal with. There was about 3 members of the operational leadership team that could not get with the program and were not interested in making the changes we needed to be successful. They lasted approximately 3 months. There was a solid attempt to uplevel there, but a lot of that just comes from the willingness to have difficult conversations with humans and really do a good job about putting vision in front of them to allow them to raise themselves to the challenge, but if they won't, then they kind of won't. But Literati went from like 3 segmented buildings that were like what we call garage style warehouses, no loading docks, like unloading everything with a forklift in a parking lot. And so now we're in like a 35,000 square foot warehouse with a couple of docks, and that's kind of nice. But like, and we're going to expand to next door. We're already cutting holes in walls. So I imagine in like 3 years, I'll probably have a warehouse in, I don't know, New England, probably one on the West Coast, and we'll maintain one in Austin because of sentimentality, but not financial reasons. But yeah, I mean, and so we're just kind of growing like that. Stuff that I saw when I got to Literati was definitely like good in the sense that nobody was malicious, but it was definitely just not very refined.
Got it. So I heard like, good, solid culture, but not really building the best practices around logistics. And so
Right.
can you tell us a little bit in terms of, beyond finding the right, like just getting the right people, right, that were willing to change, what did you prioritize to kind of start to up level the culture and like the processes in the operation side?
So and this goes back to kind of the change adverse thing. When you get in, like, if you don't know what you're doing, find somebody that knows what they're doing, and then like ask them intelligent questions, or get them to come visit you and provide intelligent answers. A lot of like they were trying to use metrics, but they were trying to use them incorrectly. So one of the things that I did very quickly was up level the metric game. Like, here's the metrics that actually count. Like, they were counting something that they lovingly called tack time, which for those of you who are not familiar with like a manufacturing background, I won't go into it, but they weren't using it correctly. So we switched to like a pack rate or a pick rate or a assembly rate, and then got them away from like having an aggregate to an individual score so that everyone could move at their own speed. And so like helping people understand like that power was in their destiny was in their own hands. I can be successful at this. I can take the training that I'm looking for. And that was kind of the other thing. We standardized the training. I standardized start times. When I got here, people were like, sometimes we show up at 7 and sometimes we show up at 8. And I was like, no, we don't. We're all going to be here at the same time. So just like made things as consistent as possible for the team, found a way to level out my labor curve to the best of my ability. Obviously, like, things are still punchy. Like, probably none of us can get away from that. Because Literati is a subscription service, we had originally like 1 fulfillment a month, and that was a huge labor peak in the middle of every month. So I would go from needing 5 people to needing 50 people. And then the next month, because we were still growing, I'd go from needing 10 people at the beginning and end of the month and 100 people in the middle of the month. And so that wasn't like a scalable labor solution. Even with InstaWork and any other temp provider you possibly could have found, like, that just broke. So we found a way to like distribute that labor across the majority of the month. And that's really what like made a lot of wins for us at Literati, was getting that distribution squared away. So like my hiring plan and my labor plan, like, just like approached a straighter line. And that was one of the things that immediately allowed me to be successful.
Interesting. Can you tell a little bit more in terms of like that secret? How did you, like, what did you end up doing to smooth out labor? Because I think that's probably, we hear that a lot with businesses, like just ebbs and flows.
So, I mean, if you're a more traditional e-com business, you're truly screwed. Not to mince a whole lot of words there, right? Like, marketing is all about, or the team is all about like bringing as many sales in as they can. For us, what we did was we actually split our sales group into 2 cohorts. So as like basically as new customers came in, we said, hey, we're going to spin up a second fulfillment cycle, and we're going to shove the first fulfillment cycle to the very beginning of the month. So I effectively now have 2 fulfillment cycles, one from the 1st to the 15th, one from the 15th to the 30th. And then we weighted that second fulfillment group disproportionately with new customers as they came in, so that our first group, maintained a slight growth, but that second group really accelerated. So, I don't know how many people have things that they can pre-pack, but like Literati has to do this interesting, like, kind of mismatch of like traditional e-com, like, let's get it out the door, 4 p.m., like final pull, critical pull time type thing, to a more manufacturing based, like, hey, I have to have a certain number of parts produced and ready and staged. And like, so that's kind of the balance that we're going through there. And that's how we got our labor just a little bit smoother. I mean, it's not an ice rink right now, but like, it's way better than it was.
Got it. And so maybe diving into a bit more around how did you start to up level? So you said just so there's a few people who've joined. Tom came in with a very sort of immature type of operations, started up leveling the whole team by first creating individual metrics and benchmarks, right? That really tied to productivity, so that there was individual accountability, standardizing start times, training. So like everybody had a very consistent, clear way of doing things. And then I think the third was around just more to manage your labor costs and hiring. How do you distribute and have some influence around when the peaks and valleys are happening within your business, right? So that you could have a little bit more consistency with the people that you're working with. I think from there though, like, like when you talk about change, and given that this focus is a little bit more around like how you engage your people, you know, up level them, the change management is really difficult. Can you talk a little bit about some of the things that you've learned that work, and or how you like some of your operating principles?
So I think that there's a couple of things that I'll throw out here, and we'll probably talk a little bit about it and later on, but there's a book that if you haven't read, you should. It's called Extreme Ownership, How Navy SEALs Lead and Win by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin. And it is a doctrine amongst my staff. You, in fact, cannot work for me and get promoted unless you cannot discuss this book with me. So chapter 3 in that book is titled, I believe, Believe. And the Believe chapter is all about like explaining the commander's intent and the vision behind like what the change that you're trying to orchestrate is. And so that's kind of a lot of words for people sometimes. So the other half of this is definitely the numbers game. Like you've got to be able to put a number, you've got to be able to relate it back to the business, you've got to be able to explain that math to humans. And sometimes, like, let's just be honest, sometimes the humans that work for me aren't mathematically inclined. So like this is big picture and sometimes with pictures, right? Like flow charts, like diagrams, graphs that you can just throw a quick PowerPoint on the wall, you know, something like that, seem to be working very well. And so, excuse me, that change management was all about making them understand the greater impact and then the personal impact. Like, because sometimes humans aren't super motivated by like, let me do the good thing for the company. They need to be motivated by let me do the good thing for myself. And if you can get yourself into a situation where you have performance-based incentive structure, I've always found that to be highly competitive and effective. Set an aggressive baseline comp structure there. And then for the people that excel and don't have any quality defects, provide them more money. Cash is king.
Can you go into more detail in terms of maybe some of the performance structures or incentives you've tested, things that have worked, not worked, sure. Is working for you now? Yeah.
So if you have a packing operation in your business, pay to pack is sometimes, as it's referred, pay to pack is always effective. If you have a quality metric associated with it. You can never just tell people like, just go faster and I'll give you more money, because what you're going to wind up with is like broken wine bottles or improperly packed books, or, you know, the wrong container gets put in the wrong place, whatever it is. Like if you just say go fast and I'll give you money, like people find a way to go fast. So we measure quality defects, like because we know exactly who packs every single box. So if a customer calls in and they're saying, I'm missing this piece, it's not in the box, that's your quality ding. And so if you get like 5 quality dings in a month, you're not eligible for the packing rate, like incentive structure. We also incentivize things like safety, like, hey, how many ORIs does it have, to kind of keep that in check. Another thing that I've done, I'm not doing it in Literati now because we don't warrant doing it, but we've also done incentive structure around replenishments per hour for the replen team, moving stuff from storage locations in your warehouse to forward pick faces, stuff like that. But.
And something that I've heard from others is sometimes it's hard to justify paying the extra money, right? Like we all work
Sure.
with pretty tight margins. And so like, how do you measure that it's actually worth it?
I hire less people and I tell the accountants to get stuffed. So basically, you do have to have that conversation and convince the accountants like that it is going to work, and then obviously it needs to work. But I have actually decreased the number of humans that are in the building because I've increased the performance of the team. So I physically like because we set an annual plan and like trust me, with a startup that's growing as fast as this one is, like it's mostly written in soap, right? Like it's not chiseled into stone. But like they set a plan, we set certain benchmarks, and then like I just beat the plan. Um, and like I get that that's harder when you're not going through like 300% growth in a year. Like if I was working for a business and they had a 10%, growth trajectory, like that would be a lot tighter. Or if my margin was even smaller, that would be a lot tighter. The real upside to this and the selling point is like, hey, the better quality human you have working for you, the more you're going to get out of them, the more engaged they're going to be, the better quality you're going to get, the less you have to pay, like overall. So.
Um, I think that's a great point. What about maybe not some non-monetary structures when it comes to encouraging performance? People are motivated for many different things, and so what are some of the ways that you've managed like to use that to your advantage?
I like Mongolian metal music. HU. My team does not love the Who as much as I do, but I do play music for my entire warehouse, and I give the fastest packer DJ privileges for an hour, and so they get to listen to something else. And that may seem silly, but like it's a lot of little things like that. Or we'll do like power hours, and I'll give somebody a $50 gift card to Amazon, stuff like that. Or like, hey, whoever packs the most packages today can take a half day off tomorrow. Stuff like that, just to like because it can't all just be financial. Um, the other thing that I offer to do for like high performers is I'll do like what we call leadership development or book club with them, and they get to pick a book for leadership development, whatever book that they want, and then I give them part of my time for personal development to like go through that. Now, obviously, if you've got 3,000 humans in your operation, like even if you gave each of them a minute, you'd still be freaking out of time. But like that's one of the things, like again, going back to a principle in extreme ownership is decentralized command. Where I would say there is like identify the leaders that are in your building that you could push that down to see how they can interact, with those individual team members to really like get them to buy in to like the fact that you're invested in their development.
I'm going to continue on. I think there's one, I wanted to get to one particular topic, and then we can definitely open it up to more questions. But I think kind of around that engagement part, like Michael, that you've said, how do you engage and retain the employee base? I think in particular with COVID, right? Like we can't necessarily have everybody come into the room. We can't have as much of that rah-rah as much. So what have you done to make sure that everybody is understanding that mission, the vision is still like really motivated?
So we have really good morning stand-ups and we have like really good like KPI reporting. And like, even though like I can't have everybody in the room, one of the things that like I'll do is like I still cook for the team. Like, so, one of the benefits of having a smaller team, 50 people, the most in the building right now, is that like I can wheel my giant smoker outside and still do that for them. And then like I just basically set up like bento box takeaway style, like, hey, come by and grab this. So like I think people like to see leaders working for them and working for their good. So cooking a meal for them has always been effective, even if it's like not a whole lot. The other thing is we make it very clear that a temp associate is held to the exact same standards as our full-time people. And like when I bring lunch in for the team, like that's not lunch for my full-time guys. That's lunch for anybody that's in the building. And so we really do just treat all of our temp associates just like they've been hired from day one, and that's like all the positive and all the critical feedback like all at once. So we just never budge on standard. But they sit in all the same meetings. Like if we've got a team meeting, like we don't just keep the temps in the corner, like they're part of the meeting too.
Yeah. Have you got to change anything either in the physical space or in some of the reporting structures or reporting communications that you've done to be able to accommodate the fact that maybe people are a little bit more like socially distanced or like in staggered? Just
We haven't had a whole lot of issues like that. I mean, again, I imagine that like that gets harder when like, I mean, if the buildings that I used to run in Spreetail, it was a little bit more difficult because like the sheer number of humans that you have right now, I've got enough floor space that it's not a big deal. People can still stand 6 feet away from each other. All of my packing stations are segregated. All of my asset assembly stations are segregated. Again, like I think that the humans that are willing to work and that want to come in aren't going to have an issue with it once they get here. It's the humans that were looking for an excuse not to be there anyway that are going to say the thing and leave. I mean, we do temp checks. If you're coughing and you got a little bit of a fever, sorry about you, bud. You can't work here today. You got to go. But otherwise, it's not been that big of a delta for us. I think that like we don't sit around and drink on Wednesdays or Fridays like we used to, but stay lovely.
And when it comes to more maybe the day-to-day interaction, I know as one thing around extreme ownership is really clear communication and also constant feedback. And so how do you incorporate that into your day-to-day and especially in this sort of current environment?
So that's really not changed like a single solitary bit. Like my area managers are still out there. My team leads are still out there. I mean, they're all wearing masks and like just coming by, but like they might not stand directly next to you. But like if we need to have a training moment or a coaching moment because like your KPIs aren't going well, like they just step in there and do that. That might be a little blasé for some people, but like in the operations world, like we're in the business of getting shit done. And that means like you've got to be willing to touch a box. You've got to be willing to do a thing and lead from the front. So we still provide all that feedback. We still have very similar interactions. It hasn't really changed for us. And that's been intentional.
Beyond the things that we've talked about in terms of like incentives, motivation, what are some areas that Tom, maybe you're investing in to help, continue to get everybody to produce at a higher rate, with that quality in mind?
I mean, honestly, a lot of it is financial. But one of the other things that we offer is like we're developing a fairly robust training program. So like if my area managers want to get their 6 Sigma green belt, like I'll be on the hook for that. Like I'll offer them like a way to level themselves up, professionally. Like I might not be able to keep all the humans that work for me forever, but at a minimum, like when they leave me, they'll be able to like up level themselves into their next org. So like they can see that I'm gonna be willing to dump that energy, effort, thought, time, training, cost, all of it in there, and just like level them up as individuals, whether or not it directly benefits me.
And if that, and if for those who maybe don't have the skills or the resources to do that in-house, like, is that something you do in-house, or do you, how else do you provide that type of resourcing and training?
Yeah, so we don't do all of that in-house for sure. Like a green belt certification, we're getting from the University of Purdue, and like there's just different online courses. Our customer service team uses LinkedIn Learning, which I'm not a giant fan of, but like, sure, get yourself some LinkedIn badges. No, we definitely outsource that where needed. Our HR business partner is pretty good about like being an advocate there, and then just like taking some of that bandwidth off of me or out of my bandwidth. Like I'm just like, hey, Sam, I need you to go run this down, find a way to do this thing. This is the stuff that we want to do. So we're just kind of building that out. So we used to keep people in cohorts, and we would get, say if we were bringing on 20 people and we've got 4 functional areas of the business, like I chop out 5 of them and be like, hey, this is packing team, this is picking team, this is inbound team, this is inventory team. And then like we assign like a human that's like monitors them and like, is responsible for like relaying those job instructions. And then like, they're never more than like 1 aisle or 1 packing station away from like Mama Bird. And so like anytime they just need a little bit of knowledge regurgitated, Mama Bird's right there to yuck it up for them. But like, especially like, cause our Q4 was also pretty bonkers at Spreetail. And so like our staffing would double. We would run 50-60% temp utilization sometimes. So like, that's pretty gnarly to have in there. And so we would keep those cohorts together as much as possible, because then they would like associate with each other and they would stay in those units. together, and like not doing job hopping was key there. Like, don't take a guy you trained for 2 hours in one thing and then make him go do another thing. Keep them in that same job function for at least 2 weeks if you can swing it, and then like let them get that muscle memory and that proficiency.
I mean, with that, I'll close it. Thank you, Tom, for a really insightful and candid conversation, and for everybody here who have joined in and pitched in. I think this was really fruitful, and I hope you were able to get something out of it.
Yes, have a good one.